You have to stand on your rights for yourself and your children. Nobody else is going to safeguard them for you. No hospital, no doctor, no government agency has the authority over our children. We do. Now, this is in Idaho. Every year, 1,300 children will be taken from their families. So if we have an agency that's getting it wrong, something has to be done. Well, I'm with Freedom Idaho, and I'm going to talk about, hey, government, keep your hands off of our children, right? Yeah. I know we're all feeling it right now. With Freedom Idaho, we're more than an organization. We're a community of mothers steadfastly defending the rights of our families against the governmental system that has betrayed its promise to protect. We live in a world where a government agency, under the guise of safeguarding our children, inflicts trauma on our families. HFI is an organization found and led by mamas. It just kind of happened that way. Mama's Bears got in the fight, I think, before the Papa Bears did. They joined, it seems like, around COVID, and before that, it was the Mama Bears. And I'm happy to have paved the way, and I was really glad when the men came and had our backs. We've been on the front lines, tirelessly advocating for our children. We are the embodiment of maternal strength, sacrificing our time, energy, and sometimes our own well-being to ensure that our children are shielded from harm and provided with the love and care they deserve. We firmly believe that no government agency, no matter how well-intended, can ever replace the profound love and nurture of a parent in the child's life. No hospital, no doctor, no government agency has the authority over our children. We do. And you are your own child's best advocate. Nobody has a vested interest but you. This is a staggering statistic. Now, this is in Idaho. Every year, 1,300 children will be taken from their families. Every year. And each child will spend 8 to 12 months away from their family. Now let's look at a national statistic. Almost 500,000 children are in foster care every day, and the average is 2 years away from their family. Think about the growth and development that happens in a child's life over those 2 years. The nurturing and guidance that are needed from their own parents. Now, I just want to say for certain, there are children who are neglected and abused. There are. But they get it wrong. And in fact, 87% of the time, they return the children back to their families in Idaho totally devastated and burdened with PTSD that they didn't have before, trying to figure out how this life works when they don't have the protection of their own parents, knowing that at any time they can be taken, stolen by a government, and put into some other people's families, or maybe even a group home, even worse. They continue to carry the trauma throughout their lives. So if we have an agency that's getting it wrong, something has to be done. The number one reason that they're taking children is for something called neglect. Now, neglect is really hard to define. In fact, you and I would probably define it differently. Is neglect having some food in the fridge, but maybe not as much as you and me? Is neglect having dishes in the sink or laundry on the sofa or letting your kids play outside for too long? These are all reasons I've seen on police reports for why they've taken children. So defining neglect is really important. And it's really important for the caseworker, really, and the police officer, because they're burdened with having to define that for themselves in the moment. It's really important that we come up with a definition of neglect that we can all live with and support. Right now, there's no definition. They kind of make it up as they go. And as you know, you can ask the person sitting at your table, how do you define neglect? And it will be different for every single person at that table. So you have to know your rights. I'm going to give you some hard stories today, but really the point is that you know your rights and you can stand on your rights and you can prepare yourself and you can prepare your children for that time should CPS knock. And I'm going to ask you some questions because you have constitutional rights, right? Some states could try to usurp those by passing laws or health department rules that usurp those rights. And if they've done that, you need to go and advocate for their removal or for their change. But I'm going to ask you, because I want to see if you know that you have these constitutional rights. So feel free to answer out loud. Do you have the right to remain silent and to refuse to answer questions? Yes. Do you have the right to refuse entry to your home or other premises if there's no warrant from the court? Yes. Do you have the right to consult an attorney and to have an attorney present during questioning? Yes. Do you have the right to refuse the questioning of your minor child in your home or on your property if there's no warrant to examine your child? Yes. If you waive your rights and change your mind during the investigation, do you have the right to inform CPS or DCFS immediately if your desire to exercise your rights changes? Yes. These are your rights. You have to stand on your rights for yourself and your children. Nobody else is going to safeguard them for you. So you got to be proactive. And that's why you're here today, right? You're being proactive. And I'm going to give you some tools, things that you can do right now. You want to find a CPS health freedom group, like Health Freedom Idaho. Here in Idaho, there's health freedom groups that popped up all over the United States. So look for the health freedom advocacy group in your state. And also, there's a lot of times a CPS advocacy group. In fact, we have one called Power here. Christine is here. Christine, can you give a wave wherever you are? Right over there. Christine is a mama bear who had her son stolen from her. And once he turned 18, she started Power and she sued people. She'd have to tell you all about her lawsuit, but they poked the wrong mama bear, right? And that's what happens. They poke the wrong mama bear and then the mama bear gets active, and that's what she's done. So she has an advocacy nonprofit that can help you get an attorney and know your rights. So make relationship with your health freedom groups and your advocacy groups. Make relationships right now so that you can call them should you need. Find a friendly doctor. Man, this is tough. This is tough. I know this is tough. And each family has to answer this for themselves. Because sometimes you find a friendly doctor, but then they're not in a practice that's friendly. So you've got to vet the doctor. You've got to vet the practice. You've got to make sure that they align with your style of parenting. Are you a natural-minded parent? Then you need to find a doctor that aligns with your belief system, your healing philosophies. I know Dr. Charles Pennick has been here, and he's awesome. I was going to give him a shout out and have him wave. I think he might be coming later. But he's awesome. So find one of those in your state. Or some parents decide that they're not going to go to any doctors like that they don't want to be in the system because they feel like they're opening the door to the government. And I don't blame them. I've been warning pharma and the government for years that this was going to happen, literally since 2015. If you keep pressing and taking people's children through the hospital system, they're not going to bring their kids when they need to. And that's what's happening. So I can't tell you what to do here. And none of this is legal advice, really. This is experience advice. None of this is legal advice. But you're going to have to decide with your partner and decide with your family how you're going to handle this particular question. Because should the time come, you're going to have to stand very united against this attack on your family. And you don't want to leave any room for disagreement. So settle this out now so you can stand firmly together. CPS destroys marriages and families. I see it all the time. The ones who withstand are the ones who have made decisions ahead of time, jointly, united, and ready to stand together. So do that now. Identify capable and willing family and friends. Should there be an issue, these are the family and friends that are going to come to help you. And research your state laws. One of the things you need to research is your state a one-party or two-party consent state? Idaho is a one-party consent state. So you can record anytime you want in a conversation you're having with a caseworker, a police officer, whatever. You can record. That way you have it. Now, you got to find out what the laws are in your state because you might have to have consent from the other person to record. Educate your children. Okay, this is hard for some people because it's hard to have this conversation with your babies. Trust me, I've had it. You have to tell your babies, never, ever, ever open the door. Never, ever. Gone are the days when you and I were kids and we could open the door to whoever and have that blind trust and faith. Those days are gone. Never, ever open the door. In fact, I would test my kids. I'd be like, hey, I'm going to the grocery store. I'll be back in 30 minutes, right? I'd leave, drive down the road, circle back around, come and knock on the door. And they made the mistake a couple times of answering the door. What did I say? Never, ever, ever answer the door. So you have to test them because their natural inclination is to answer the door. They see you do it all the time, right? Never talk to grown-ups alone. If grown-ups are asking you questions without me there, you don't answer their questions. You ask for mommy or you ask for daddy, and that's it. So you actually have to practice with them because if you get the book called Legally Kidnapped, it's on Amazon for $10. I've got a picture of it here if you want to see it. But he's a CPS caseworker whistleblower, and he tells you the questions that they ask kids and how they trap them to answer these questions. And he explains that they know darn well that these kids are going to answer questions because they're taught to be respectful of adults. They're taught to please adults. They're also uncomfortable and they want to get away from this really uncomfortable situation. And if they just give the answer that they want, they'll leave them alone. And so he gives these questions. So I sat down with my kids and we practiced these questions, right? I would say to my child, so this is what they're going to say to you. How are you going to answer? Your mommy doesn't have enough food in the refrigerator. Well, we know, and you know, that your mommy lets you go outside too much. The child has to answer, I want my mommy or I want my daddy, no matter how you poke. And your child wants to defend you because they love you. I want my mommy or I want my daddy, and practice it. And let them know so they're wise to the questions that are going to be leading or scary or hard or maybe hurtful toward their mommy and daddy who they love. So you have to tell them, it's okay, this is what they do. So now you've armed them with knowledge and truth. And now they're prepared and not caught unaware and not as scared because they know that you know what's up and they know that you're going to come get them and you're going to fight for them. It's an important conversation to have, even though it's hard. In most states, schools are the primary referral source for CPS. It's kind of interesting. I did a presentation in Utah years ago about this topic. And when I researched Utah, actually, it was like their neighbor and their family and friends were the biggest reporter because they have a education neglect statute. And so that was the one that was commonly used by their own community, which was really sad to me. And it's also equally sad in most states that it's schools. In Idaho, it's schools. They're the primary referral source to CPS. So there's something called a mandated reporter statute, right? There's a federal mandated reporter law, and then there's state laws. Well, what Idaho did is they made everybody a mandatory reporter. And some people take that very seriously. I'll get to that here in a minute. But what you'll want to do is if you have a statute that everybody is a mandatory reporter, you'll want to scale that back to what's required federally, which is schools, teachers, nurses, counselors. Those kind of people are mandatory reporters. And just know that their training is to report first and ask questions later. So the teachers, for example, are trained to report first and ask questions later. So one of those examples is a dad who called me and he said, you're not going to believe this. My son, he's got a bunch of kids and one of them is a boy, and go figure, sometimes he's in class and he's stinky. I know. It's really wild. Anybody who has boys knows what's up there. And anybody who's been a teacher, I was a first and second grade teacher, and they all came back into school stinky after recess. Well, this teacher decided, no, I'm not going to call the parents because that's not her training. and say, hey, maybe something needs to be done about hygiene, she called CPS because that's her training. So the caseworker shows up at school, the caseworker is questioning the son, the dad shows up and is like, what is going on here? Why didn't you call me? Well, that's not her training. So you need to understand that mandatory reporters are going to call first and ask questions later. CPS investigation, it requires a comprehensive, they refer to this as a comprehensive safety assessment, which includes a robust information collection process and includes face-to-face contact and interview with your child. In general, you have to find out what your state statutes are. So a lot of times they'll say that they can't question your child without you there, but if they consider it urgent or an emergency, they can circumvent that. So in the case of the stinky boy, the teacher felt that was urgent. The caseworker thought that was urgent, so they questioned the boy without the parents there. So they can get around that, but it's really important that you know what your rights are, because if you read your rights and it says, well, you have the right anyway, but they've usurped our rights quite a bit. So read and see what your school rules are, your policy, your state statutes or rules through the department are, and educate yourself. And if your children are going to school, whether it's a public school or a private school, go and let them know, hey, I want to let you know that I'm aware that you could be calling CPS if you feel like there's some kind of an emergency. I'd rather you call me first. I'm an engaged parent. I'm aware and engaged. So call me first, because I'm ready to take action. I'm here for my child. But if you do call CPS, my children are not allowed to be questioned without me present. Ever. Not allowed. Now, some parents are afraid to be that bold. I have 4 kids. I've always been that bold. And maybe I'm that mom. I don't care. I'll be that mom all day long for the safety of my children. Right? They've really never messed with me. Go figure. So, traumatizing children in the name of safety assessment. This is a little bit of a harder story, but this is the truth that you have to know, because when parents call me and they say, well, maybe I'll go ahead and comply, when I tell them this hard story, then they know they cannot comply their way into liberty. That's just not how it works. But this is what you have to know, and what I found out is that when they take your child, they do an all-over physical. Whether there's been any accusation of sexual abuse at all, they do a full physical of your child. And I found this out from who's now a dear friend and a total Papa Bear. In fact, I think he's Papa Bear in my phone. He had 3 children, young and at home. His wife was a stay-at-home mom. He was working. The neighbor, who was taking it very much upon herself to report, mandatory reporter, and she's thinking, wow, these kids are playing outside a lot. And so she thinks it's too much. She thinks they're playing outside too much, just like we talked about, what is neglect? She felt like it was too much, so she called CPS and said, hey, my neighbor's letting her 3 kids play outside an awful lot. So they have to investigate. The call's been made, they have to investigate. They come out and they come to the door, and when they come to the door, it's the caseworker along with a police officer or 2. And so when they come to your door, you oftentimes feel like you're supposed to let them in, right? No, you don't let them in without a warrant. Again, this is not legal advice. This is experience advice. And from what I've seen, the people who say no at the door keep their kids, and the people who let them in don't keep their kids. And so what happened is, she said, like most loving parents, come in, yes, of course I take care of my children. Of course I love my children. Come in and see that I have food. They wrote down, like I so often see, the police officer wrote down dishes in the sink, laundry on the sofa, and had gone through the daughter, who was 9 years old at the time, who had epilepsy, went through her pills and found that there were a couple of extra pills, and assumed, without talking to the parents, that they were neglecting her and not giving her her epilepsy medicine. And this was the foundation for taking all 3 of their children. The little girl who had epilepsy explained to her daddy later that she was taken into a room with strangers, stripped down naked, and her whole body looked at, including her vagina. And she was so terrified she had the worst seizure of her life and had to have a shot in her butt. Now, this was after, gosh, I want to say it was almost a year and a half before they got their kids back. And she's explaining this trauma to her dad. You know, now this little girl knows, my daddy can't protect me. I'm not safe. I'm not safe at home. The daddy now knows I can't protect my children. This is a complete shredding of the fabric of the family. Now, insult to injury, the dad got the bill for this assault to his child and had to pay for it. And somehow this dad has to work enough to pay his regular bills, pay everything that comes up with foster care, all the classes they want you to take, all the hoops they want you to jump through, the attorneys that they need, and doctor bills. Now, this particular family, of course, their marriage ended, and their son was suicidal. This is the damage that they do to our families, and they're getting it wrong such a large percentage of the time. When CPS knocks, you have to remember the Fourth Amendment. The Fourth Amendment states, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, effects, against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated. Oh, and no warrants shall issue, but upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things seized. Read the Fourth Amendment, etch it on your heart so you're ready to stand on it should they knock. When CPS knocks, you have to remember and practice. I don't know if you do this at home where you practice should there be an intruder. We do this at our house. You practice where should there be an intruder, who's going to go where, how you respond. And you can do the same for CPS. Mentally practice. Physically practice. Go on the internet. There's plenty of YouTube videos of parents standing at the door and saying, get off my property. Get off my property. You don't have a warrant? Get off my property. You're trespassing. Watch those videos and see how it goes so you can empower yourself to do such a thing should you be confronted with a caseworker and a police officer too at your door. Remember to convey strength. Consider your body language. Consider your tone. They are looking for any weakness. If they smell blood in the water, that's it. Be firm, even-toned, and know your rights. Now, ask questions and take notes. What is your name? Why are you here? Get specific information. Don't let them just say neglect. What are the specifics? Now, you can do this a couple of different ways. I've seen this done a couple of different ways. Some people stand at the door. I happen to have a big window, so I could probably stand at the door and be like, what are you doing? Why are you here? What is your name? I'm recording. Get off my property. I could do that. Or I could go outside, shut the door behind me, walk them off of my property to the public sidewalk and say, what are you doing? Why are you here? What is your name? I'm recording, and I'll call my attorney, and that's who you will hear from. But I would never, ever, ever let them into my home, because you have to remember that they're coming in to affirm what they already believe is true, which is that you're abusing and neglecting your child. Now, I know that only from caseworkers who've shared their stories. I've never been a caseworker, but when they share their stories about what they've been doing and how they were trained as caseworkers, that's what they say. And you'll find that in that book I was telling you about, which you can come check out. And I've interviewed actually a whistleblower caseworker, and she just rocked my world. So you can actually go to the YouTube channel on Health Freedom Idaho or on Rumble, and you can watch some of these interviews that I've done. absolutely floored me. Just when I think that I know how evil it is, I find out that it's exponentially more evil. So you don't want to waive your constitutional rights and have them come into your house because you've already given up your Fourth Amendment when you let them come in, right? You can always reclaim it, but you've given it up and you've let them have entry. And then when you start signing things and agreeing to things, you're just giving up more and more of your rights. That's why you're already going to be prepared with an attorney, right? And you're already going to be prepared with an advocacy group, right? And you're already going to know your rights. In fact, Johan, are you here? Johan can give a raise. Johan is an attorney here in Idaho and one that I highly recommend. And you can talk to him. Now, not every attorney is the same. That's what you need to know. Because there are family law attorneys, but they don't understand the hidden secret courts of CPS. Johan has learned how that works and how to navigate that. And you have to have an attorney that knows that. A regular family law attorney isn't going to work. I've seen them try, and they just don't know. They want this court to respond like all the other courts that they're used to, and it just doesn't. It's a secret kangaroo court that has to be navigated a certain way, and you want an educated attorney, not one that has to figure it out on their way. Like Johan here. That's your man here in Idaho. I highly recommend him. He's the one I will go to should CPS knock on my door, but I don't think they will. Because they don't pick on the people that know their rights. Okay, so here you go. Now, if CPS takes your child, you know that you're not going to sign anything, you're not going to agree to anything, you're not going to accept a public defender, because do you know who the public defender gets paid by? This whole kangaroo CPS court system. So they're not working for the parent. They're working on behalf of the state. If your children are taken, you'll have something called a shelter care hearing. You'll need to bring a lot of character witnesses and your doctor if you can. This is just so important. And of course, your attorney, Johan, could tell you more about that shelter care hearing, but it's pivotal. It's so important. And if you've done all the things to educate yourself, you're ready. You're ready to go to battle. Hopefully, you haven't even gotten here. But if you find yourself here, you got to be ready to go to battle. So what you need to do for sure, you already know your rights. You're going to invoke them. Record every interaction. This is all on that handout we handed out too. Call the attorney you've already retained. Already retain your attorney like an insurance policy you hope you never have to use. Call the advocates you've already made relationships with. Use social media to draw attention. Pack the courthouse if you go to court. Protest outside of the health and welfare offices or outside of the courthouse on court day. Don't be afraid to raise a fuss. Nobody's taking my kids without me raising a fuss about it. I'll tell you that right now. You are the only ones that can protect your family and your kids. You are the only ones who can stand on your rights. Nobody's going to do it for you. CPS is not a business of protecting children. It's in the business of profit. And again, the ugly truth is that we fund it that way. So people oftentimes say, well, it's broken. CPS is broken. Foster care is broken. It's not broken. This is the way we fund it. That was the ugly aha moment that I had because I used to think it was broken. And then I researched how we fund it. So there was something called CAPTA, which is in the handout, and that was federally put into place, and then all the states signed on to CAPTA. They brought it into their states, and that gave caseworkers the ability to come into people's homes and ask questions later, leaving no due process for these parents. And then came ASFA. ASFA is the fast track of adoption. This was signed by Bill Clinton. Go figure, yeah? They made it sound so nice to quickly get children adopted out so they didn't have to spend as much time in foster care. So they incentivize the rehoming of children. A lot of times it's $4,000 per child bonus on top of all the money that they make for the year and a half, 2 years of money coming from that federal dollars incentivizing caseworkers to take children. So this is a $5 billion a year industry. That's our money being used against us to steal our children and then a bonus for rehoming them. The other thing you need to know is where this money is coming from. It's called Title IV funding. That's our Social Security money. So in case you've heard that you're not going to have Social Security money there for you by the time you need it, and you're thinking, well, why? Because I pay into it. Why is my money not going to be accessible to me? That's because we're using that money to steal children with a bonus of rehoming them. And if they're a special needs child, you might get an extra $2,000 bonus. So a lot of times, and what I thought and what a lot of people think, is that we are reuniting families, that we're using that money to educate families or give them the tools they need so that we can reunite them and they can be together, but that's not the case. The government is spending 10 times more on foster care and adoption than reuniting families. It's a good investment for them, right? Because they get a big bonus if they adopt them out. So CPS and DCFS, it depends on what it's called in your state, incentivizes states to take children and rehome them, and Social Security pays for it. Now, also, if they're on medication or they see doctors, all of this is a bonus. There's one gal that I interviewed, I can't forget her sweet name. She's basically a child that was brought up in the foster care system in a group home, and now she's a whistleblower and trying to explain what happens in these places. They moved her around from home to home, and when they moved her around, she'd have to start the medical process all over again, or the mental health process all over again. So she was just put on more medications, taken off some medications, put on some more medications. Every 3 to 6 months, they're just bouncing her around and just adding more medications, and nobody's really keeping track of what this little girl is on. Now she's noticing, now she finds herself in a group home, which was horrific. She notices that they're just drugging all these kids because they're rebellious. They're angry. They want to go back to their families. So they give them this medication every day, and she notices that all her friends kind of go docile, like robots. So she decides to stop taking it. She's hiding it. She's getting rid of it. She's like, I don't want that to happen to me. And that was the smartest thing she did, because now she's just an amazing advocate for what is taking place in especially these group homes. But when they do that, they make money every time. She explains that she realized that she was a cash cow, that wherever she goes, she's making money for this foster family or for this group home. And wherever they put her into new mental health treatments or doctors, they're making more money. She realized she's a cash, all those kids did. And she talks about how they actually use that, right? They're like, we know how much money you get for us, right? So they get this attitude about it. I can't say that I blame them. 500,000 children endure heartbreaking CPS separation for an average of 1 to 2 agonizing years. And we already know that statistic, but I really want you to take that to heart now that you understand the money and the incentivization behind it and the trauma that's happening to our families and our children. How do we build a society with kids and families that have that kind of trauma? And of course, they medicate our kids. Children and adolescents with foster care experience are diagnosed with PTSD at twice the rate of US war veterans. And this is a staggering new statistic that I actually hadn't seen until I researched in preparation for this particular presentation. 55 children will disappear from foster care system today. So when parents or grandparents call me and they're like, hey, we are struggling with our daughter and maybe we should call, just so you know, 55 children are disappearing every day from the foster care system. Is that the safest place? Is that the government really doing it better with our $5 billion? Did you know that in the past 20 years, the cases of over 100,000 missing foster children? And they close up these missing cases really quickly. And what's really sad is that they, under the guise, I feel like it's a guise, of saying that they can't share this child's personal information because they're in foster care. So when they go missing, they can't really share their picture or their information. So how do we find them? How do we find them? Well, that's the perfect situation for kidnappers, isn't it? To be able to steal children that can't really be advertised as missing? So let's talk about some ideas for legislation to protect your families. Senator Scott Herndon has passed some really good legislation in Idaho, and I know he'll be working on more. One is to restrict mandatory reporters. We talked about that. The other is a simple notification of rights bill, which was actually signed in Idaho by the governor this year. So that's very exciting. Yes, Health Freedom Idaho supported it. Senator Scott Herndon ran it. 4 years it took him to get it passed. Can you even imagine? And this bill was simply just to say that you have to notify the parents that they don't have to let you in. So, hey, we're a caseworker, we're with health department, we're here to come in, but you don't have to let us in. Perfect. That's so important for parents to understand their rights right off the bat. You can't believe how hard they fought to not get that passed. It took them 4 years to get that passed. So simple. If you don't have that in your state, work to get such a simple notifications of rights bill passed, and you can check out Idaho law. I can send it to you. Criminalize false reporting. Have you heard about exes and angry siblings or angry mothers-in-laws or father-in-laws or whatever reporting on each other? Criminalize that. You can't knowingly make a false claim because you're mad at the mom because she hurt your son. You can't. You're taking a huge risk with your grandchildren that you have no idea what you're doing. So criminalize that. Check your state statutes. Criminalize that. Cut the budget. Huh? Let's cut the budget. We're not going to give you so much money to steal our children. Maybe if you have less of a budget, you'll focus on the kids that actually need your help and stop making so many mistakes. Remove any educational neglect statute. That's got to go. If you ever see them trying to pass that stuff in Idaho, you got to fight it. I'm so thankful we don't have that. Define neglect by giving parents the authority over their children to make healthcare decisions and everything else. So check your laws and the rules that are created by the department, which oftentimes usurp the actual state law. That's where they hide the stuff. And nobody knows it because they just take these rules and they just pass them without really looking at it. So check those rules and see what your health department rules are saying. Yes. So we did get that passed. So we do have a good law here in Idaho, and so does California and Texas, protecting against false reporting. So check that out, right? Check out those states and then take it to your state legislator and say, I want this here. Safe Families for Children is pretty amazing. They actually could take the place of a state-funded, federally funded foster care system. And the beautiful thing about Safe Families for Children is it's hosted by the churches and the communities, the way we used to do it before we started giving up our sovereignty to the government. So check them out. If there's a situation that you know about, check them out. See if they can help this situation. I'm going to share with you right now, I was on my deathbed about 10 years ago, 12 years ago. I was on my deathbed. I had 4 little kids. If anybody had called about me because I was so sick and dying and they had taken my kids, I guarantee you I would have died. No doubt. They were my reason and they were my purpose. But because I had a community and a church family that came around me and helped me, they got my kids to the school bus. They brought me dinner when I needed it. I had my kids in a safe place and they were there, giving me the power to get well. There are parents like me who lose their kids in that situation and they just give up and die. They can't take the stress of it, right? Why have we given up this authority to the government? If you know a sick or hurting parent, take them under your wing and love on them. Give them what they need to get well. And I guarantee you their kids are their #1 driver to make that happen. So if you go to healthfreedomidaho.com, you will see that we have a handout that you can print out and you can put by your door about what to do should CPS knocks. Empower yourself like we talked about, make these connections, have it by your door, laminate it. If they come to your door, you're grabbing it and you can just, if you're scared, you can just repeat it, right? It's free to you. Please go to healthfreedomidaho.com, download it, print it, study it, and be ready. You'll never regret spending time getting ready to defend your children should CPS knock, right? You will regret it if you don't. But you'll never regret knowing your rights and being prepared to stand on them and helping to educate other parents if they get in this situation. That's all I have. Thank you.
What are your thoughts and comments on those of us who are sitting here and we went through that those 4 decades of time where things have changed, and now we're looking at an evening like this where it's like, defend your rights at all costs. What comments do you have for those of us who are kind of wrestling with that right now?
Oh my goodness. I've wrestled with this also on my whole journey, so I totally get it. My mom's an RN, so I grew up with medical doctors around me all the time. My stepdad was military, and then I had family members that were law enforcement. And I would say all of their characters were great, and they would never participate in this, right? But I've watched and I've researched and I've seen these things be put into place that incentivize the removal of children. And standard of care has really taken over. I think our doctors could probably speak better to that. But what I've seen firsthand is standard of care has really taken over our medical model and leaves little room for parents to decide. And then the training, I mean, I've had friends go through training and get their doctorate and be told that parents don't know anything. And for example, be told in class that if a child receives a vaccine and has a seizure, that's normal, and to tell the parents that that's normal. So that kind of education and the incentivization has changed the landscape from what we grew up with, unfortunately. And so with that change, we have to change.
If we are teaching people basically to not be, we'll use the word totally cooperative with an investigation, won't that mean that some kids end up continuing to be victims? Like, how do we know that teaching people to not cooperate with the authorities and everything else won't cause damage to some kids that should be taken from their parents?
Oh, I know. Okay. So this is a lot. I hope I don't go on too long. First of all, you're going to have an attorney, right? I have an attorney. So I'm going to keep them at bay at my door, and then I'm going to have my attorney do the legal battle for me. Does that make sense? So if parents are truly abusing their children and truly neglecting their children, they typically don't have the money to afford an attorney who knows what they're doing in foster care. Does that make sense? Sometimes I get asked, why do they seem to return the kids that have drug-addicted parents, and they keep the kids that don't have drug-addicted parents? But the fact of the matter is that truly drug-addicted kids with drug-addicted parents that are truly neglected and abused, that whole situation, they're not sellable. They're not going to get that $4,000 bonus for rehoming them because they're not sellable. And remember when I said that they don't put their picture and their information up on the website if they're missing? Well, they do it once the parents have lost their rights. You can actually look it up and you can find a whole website full of minors, pictures, ages, information about them, like you're going to a pound and picking a dog. I literally, when I saw that website, I sobbed for days. I sobbed for, these are children, these are human beings, right? And not that I don't want a child that's really neglected and hurt to have a good family. Of course I do. Of course we all do. What I don't want is for children that have good families to be rehomed and given to another family. And if you go to the Freedom Man, the Freedom Man website, he talks specifically that Idaho children are being taken from heterosexual families and being given to homosexual families. I don't add that to my presentation. He has that on his website, and you're welcome to go check out his information. It's pretty compelling. So what is, really under all of this? But to answer your question, I would say every parent has the right to stand on their rights. And if the laws of justice, the wheels of justice are turning correctly, then the child would get the help that they need. Right? I don't want to deny anybody of their rights. Everybody should know their rights. But if they're doing what is just and right, those children will get the help that they need, and the families will get the help that they need.
If there is serious imminent danger and abuse happening, it doesn't matter if the parent says they want an attorney and all that stuff. That danger will be stopped if I'm the police officer, or 99% of the police officers that show up, that would be stopped. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yes. So one of the things that they'll say is imminent harm or danger, right? Imminent harm or danger, just like you said. And sometimes that's misused. I will say sometimes that is misused. And in Arizona, there was a case where that was misused, and the judge upheld that they can't just go on hearsay. Somebody can't just report anonymously and call that imminent harm or danger. And I'll say the police are put in a really terrible spot. In the case of baby Cyrus, I listened to the police officer in the hearing give his testimony, and I felt really bad for him because it's a terrible spot he was put in to determine whether baby Cyrus was neglected. They got pulled over at like midnight. They pull into a gas station with all this yellow lighting and this baby that's a couple months old who's being woken up at midnight, who's not the right color and wants his mommy, right? And the police officer said on the stand, I was put in the position of trying to decide if this baby was in imminent harm or danger, and he wasn't really the right color, so I said that he was. That's a really tough position. That's really not fair. That's why I really do want to define neglect so that the police officers aren't having to try to figure that out in the moment. They're not trained to look at babies and know if they're the right color at midnight, it really isn't fair. And so from my side of things, I feel that it's overused, but I talk to the parents who call me and tell me that that's how it's used, right? But then when I see the side of the officer and I think of my own family and my own friends, I think about their position and how hard it is for them to determine that, not given any guidelines through statute or rules. And I think that we can make that more clear for them so they don't have to be the bad guy in these situations and go on their own belief in the moment. It really isn't fair. Am I wrong about that? Because I'd like to know. That's been how I've determined it. I'd like to hear from you guys.
One of the texted questions is regarding when you spoke about bonuses and money and things like that. Who receives the bonus? Are we talking CPS receives it, the caseworker, the department, foster family? Who's getting all this money?
Okay, so the department gets the money. You can go online and hear from caseworker whistleblowers, and they'll tell you about their whiteboard where they have a goal of how many kids they have to take this month and how they're marking off how many they got and the pressure to go get more kids because we had to bring some kids home, so go get more kids. You can hear that from their mouths. It's not me saying it, it's them saying it, and I'm just giving a platform for their voice. But they talk about how very much money-driven it is. I own a property management business. I make money by having properties to rent. So I need more properties to rent. Foster care makes money by having more children in foster care and rehoming more children. They are a for-profit agency. A lot of people think it's nonprofit. It's for-profit. So go and listen to the caseworkers themselves tell you the pressure that they have. Legally kidnapped, Carlos tells you about the pressure that he had to go get more kids. Sylvia, who I interviewed, she talks about the pressure to get more kids, and that's why she just couldn't bear it. She said she was literally driving around looking for kids to take. And that's when she just couldn't live with herself anymore. So those are the stories that I read and I listen to and I interview and I try to give voice to.
We've recently had some doctors in here, Pennick and Dr. Cole, talking about vaccines. And you take a place, unfortunately, we don't have to deal with this right now in Idaho, but you take a place like California or some of the more quote unquote progressive states. And if you're not giving vaccines to your children, all the vaccines, then it could be seen that you're doing damage to your child. Where do you think we are in the spectrum, like locally? Let's just talk about Idaho for a minute. How close are we to that? Because there are people like literally moving out of California for that one reason. That's why they are deciding to move out of California.
Oh, I'm excited to give you guys good news. I've been totally devastating you all night. Here's some good news. Okay, so Health Freedom Idaho came on the scene in 2015. And for me, it was the right to access holistic practitioners. And also, I saw in California that they were passing SB 277. And even though I was literally in the height of my painful illness, I could see the writing on the wall that they were going to take away our exemptions and also take away our ability to access holistic health, and that we as a human population were going to be in a bad way. So I started Health Freedom Idaho in 2016. I'm the founder. Sarah Clendenin also helped start Health Freedom Idaho, and she writes our bills. So one of the first things we did was tell the department, we brought bills saying the department is out of line, the Health and Welfare Department, with their rules requiring parents to sign a vaccine exemption form. That's not what the statute says. The statute says you can opt out for any reason. And then the department was requiring, through the schools, requiring parents to sign this god-awful form that was saying that you were knowingly putting your child at risk if you don't give this vaccine, initial here. I'm knowingly putting my child at risk if I don't give this vaccine, initial here. Well, that's not in line with the statute, and the department rule cannot usurp the statute. So we kept bringing bills for this to be changed. They finally gave in, and they changed the rule to be in line with statute. And so the rule now says that you can either fill out the department form or sign your own handwritten note. Yes, that is a victory because we're pushing back. So you can go to the healthfreedomidaho.com website. You can search vaccine exemption form, and all that information will come up about what you can say, right? I literally, if I was in this situation, would say, I'm opting my kids out. That's it. None of your, beep, 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 business. It's none of your business. So on top of that, and I will get your question in just a minute, but I want to finish this about the vaccines. So on top of that, we got the daycares to be accepting the exemption form, just like the schools. And then students 18 and over just passed this year. It's on the governor's desk, and it says students 18 and over, if the school is receiving government money, has to also provide exemption forms or exemptions. Yes. This is a big deal because they did make a required vaccine for seniors, and some seniors are 18, and so they didn't have an exemption. But because it just said a child of school age, well, when you're 18, you're not a child of school age, right? So if you're 18, you need an exemption also. And if you go to college that's receiving state or federal dollars, you should also have an exemption. So now, if the governor signs that, then any person going to school at a school that's receiving government money or a daycare, they will be provided exemptions. So we're making progress in Idaho. We're pushing them back. They're not pushing on us. We're pushing them back. Okay, yes?
So I had a question. The baby Cyrus case obviously bothered a lot of us. And obviously we're going to try to avoid going to the hospital at all costs. But if we do have to go to the hospital with our children because it's an emergency, what do you recommend? I mean, I'm talking ER emergency, there's limbs bleeding kind of thing.
I know, it's scary. It's a terrifying, and I still have 2 children at home, so I get it. That's really, really, really tough. I would be praying first and foremost, and I would never leave my child's side and be looking for that imminent, imminent danger, imminent harm or danger, because they will say that Doctor says it's an emergency, it's imminent harm or danger, and then they'll just separate from you from your kids right there. You can talk to Christine about it. That's exactly what they did to her and her son. You've got your attorney on speed dial. You've got your advocate ready to go. You've got eyes on it. You've got people there with you. Those are the things that I would do if it were me, and I'm not giving legal advice.
Yeah, but they can separate you right there as you walk into the ER. You have no choice, right?
I haven't heard of them separating you and getting CPS right there involved. They'll do that after they run tests and find issues and they're talking with you and then do it because, I mean, I don't think they really have a case the minute you walk in that there's...
It's when you want to walk out.
or along the way. You have to be on your... If they get cares involved, you know that you're going down that track. So I know it's not an easy answer. Everybody wants a pat answer on that, but unfortunately there isn't one right now. And when anybody tries to sue the hospital or stand up to the hospital, they have their property taken from them.
Question for you.
Yes.
You mentioned claiming your rights, your Fourth Amendment rights. And then you had said if they come in, if you let them in, you can reclaim your rights.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of police officers, and we've seen these videos where police officers will lie to somebody they've pulled over, and the person knows their rights,
Mm-hmm.
and the cop can be heard on audio saying, yeah, he knows his rights, because when the cop finally gives up, he's pushing, lying to the person, and then the person stands his ground, and the cop says, he knows his rights. Okay, so let's say a mom or a dad invites the social worker and the cop into the house. They've now let them in the house. Can they reclaim and reassert their rights and say, time for you to leave? And if the police officer, this may be a question for the attorney, I don't know, but can the police officer will probably try to lie to the person to say, you've already done away with that. You've already invited us in. Your rights are gone because you already waived them.
Mm-hmm.
But you're saying they can be reclaimed.
Right.
Where do we go with that?
Well, I've seen it happen where they reclaimed it. So again, I'm not an attorney, so this is just experience talking. I shouldn't say I was there to see it, but I've had parents say, so I started to get an uneasy feeling. I asked them to leave. They did leave. I called an attorney. I found an attorney. The problem is that once your children are taken or they've come into your home, you have very limited time. You cannot go attorney hunting at that point. I mean, you can, but it's very unproductive because you have a very short amount of time, a very short window. It's like 24 to 48 hours before your shelter care hearing. And then you have to prove to this attorney in front of you that you're not actually abusing or neglecting your child. And that's really hard to do because, of course, they're thinking you have, because they're parents who do. And so now you got to try to make that relationship. So honestly, the best course of action that I've seen is to not let them in and call your attorney and let your attorney do the work that they're trained to do, right? But I have heard of parents making that mistake, getting uncomfortable, asking them to leave, and they've left. Of course, the case is still open and the wheels are still churning. So once they leave, it's not just done. You still need to call your advocate. You still need to call your attorney and get that ball rolling because their ball is rolling, that's for sure.
That's good. And I would add, for those of us who are thinking, and these times do happen, there is the invited in, and then there is discovered to be legit horrible abuse happening.
Yes.
Then let's just say the parents did that.
Yes.
I'm telling you right now, the police would not leave.
Right.
They are going to stay there, and they're going to get a warrant and do whatever they need to do, develop probable cause, make an arrest, make sure to take that kid to safety, as they should.
As they should.
That's where, like, it's just this big gray area. And unfortunately, we're more towards this point where we want to question things more than ever because of the evil that's creeped into our government. But at the same time, there are police officers and social workers and everything out there who are doing a great job saving children from truly abusive situations. So we also have to remember that too. It's a mess. It truly is a mess. And it would be wonderful if we lived in a world where we didn't have those problems, but this is the case.
You know,
And
can I add something to this real quick? I just had a call from a parent up north. And see, this is why education is so important, because the medical staff is becoming aware and police officers are becoming aware. And this baby up north actually wasn't taken because the hospital staff and the police officers came and were saying, no, this is not actual abuse and neglect, what's happening to this baby, right? The baby actually has a blood disorder where the baby bruises easily. And that would be really hard, wouldn't it, for a caseworker or a police officer to determine, because they're not doctors, if that's actual abuse. But because the hospital staff was advocating for this mama and family, and they were advocating to the police officers, and then they started advocating, so this family has stayed intact, right? So that's actually part where this education is helpful, because they were like, no, this is not, and they're becoming protective and actually advocating from what they actually know as healthcare workers. And I think that's really awesome. I thought, this is awesome. This is progress, right? I felt like this is really progress, where the police officers were listening to the hospital staff, and they were really speaking on behalf of what was true for this family.
Hi, Misty. I've had an opportunity to be around Misty when some of these interviews have happened. We work together a lot at the Idaho Dispatch. So I kind of know the answer to this, but I'd like some of you to know the answer to this. Can you explain the emotional toll that these interviews and that this line of work has on you, the mothers and the attorneys and the people that fight for the children's rights, and maybe tell them what it does to you after you shoulder the pain of these mothers and deal with the hospitals?
Well, I'm going to deal with you after, David. Yeah, I mean, you get a couple calls a week of parents that are terrified, you know, absolutely terrified of their children being stolen. You know, there's a case right now where the 16-year-old is on the spectrum and got into TikTok and became self-inflicting and very mildly. And the parents really did want help. And instead of helping this family, they stole the daughter, and they're devastated. They're absolutely devastated. And then they were talking about just moving her to Arizona to another care facility totally away from her family where they couldn't get to her. So of course it's devastating. But I can't stop, won't stop, because until we figure out the funding situation and stop incentivizing it the way we're incentivizing it, then I have to, you know, according to my conscience, even though it's really hard and nobody really wants to sit here and listen to this for 2 hours, I have to, because these kids are at stake and families are at stake. You know, the devastation that's happening is going to make for a really mentally ill, emotionally ill society if we don't figure out how to remedy this very quickly. And anyway, I hope that explains.
I know for me, my wife and I went through being foster parents, and we foster cared for a child that we ultimately adopted. He's Native American and Mexican and South American, and he's truly a joy to our family. Coincidentally, somebody types a message in here. It says, if the child is Native American, do they have the right to take the child?
From my understanding, they actually pretty much take a higher rate per capita of Native American kids, and I haven't studied that particular area enough to have stats to report on that. But from my understanding, and somebody who's probably a better educated on it might have something different to add, so I'll give that caveat. But from my understanding, because they have locked arms with the U.S. government financially and in so many other ways, they've given up a lot of their sovereignty.
The 55 kids that disappear every day, are you saying some or all of them are trafficked?
I want to remember the stat off the top of my head. You can definitely see this on healthfreedomidaho.com. I have a slide from a previous presentation that shows this. I want to say it's like 87 or 88%. It's reported that when children are recovered from child trafficking, it was like 87 or 88% of them were from foster care. So I really wanted to focus today on knowing your rights, but I do have another presentation where I give a lot more of that kind of data, and it's on our website. But yeah, I mean, there's a high amount. It's a high amount. And then they'll call them runaway. If they're missing, they'll classify it as runaway. And interestingly, different states report it differently. So then it's hard to like gather information across all of the United States and then say, okay, this is how many have run away. This is how many have just gone missing. This is how, it's just, they don't break it up the same and they don't call it the same. And then there's a category other, which actually infuriates me. What the is other? What's other? How dare you classify children that are now not in the system as other? It actually enrages me. So anyway, they make it almost impossible to really gather data across the US. So you sort of have to listen to what's being reported when they get kids. They get kids from human trafficking, and then they say, well, 87 or 88% of the time, they're from foster care. Now, what do we do with them, right? So you'll find that on healthfreedomidaho.com's website. I can say that there was a story of a woman who kept adopting kids, and they just kept disappearing, and she'd adopt kids and they're disappearing. And the agent, I'm not sure which agency he worked for, but he kind of got onto her and went to her home and was like, hey, why don't you show me all the kids that you've adopted? And she couldn't.
If you were to give advice to a family living in California where the mother and father are working full-time and they have 4 young children, what would you tell them?
So what would I tell a family with 4 children and they're both working? What would I tell them about keeping their kids safe? I would tell them not to open the door to strangers, not to talk to strangers, always ask for mommy and daddy. I would take every prevention possible, getting an attorney, vetting an attorney, putting that attorney on retainer, getting an advocacy group, a health freedom group, knowing them, making connections. Make connections in your community to help you, to come alongside you. I have 4 kids myself. It's not easy, and I've been a working mom almost the whole time. But building your community to help make you stronger is really where it's at.
I would tell them to move.
If they are honestly working family with 4 kids, it's not always feasible to move, right?
That's true. I guess some things are so important though, like if that stuff's happening with
It's-
vaccines and you
it's
have,
tough.
I don't know, I would be out of there.
Well, I lived in San Diego for 3 years, and I bounced the minute they started talking about how they were going to teach my kid in kindergarten. I was like, got to go. Born and raised here, visited San Diego for 3 years, and I was like, that's not going to work for me.
Just a follow up on that last question, and that is to make sure you have a supportive doctor, because that's what I have a lot of experience with is medical kidnap. And if you don't have a supportive doctor, that shelter care hearing happens in 48 hours, you're up a creek without
Yeah.
a paddle.
Yeah.
And so that supportive doctor in this day and age is crazy, crazy, crazy important. No matter whether they're healthy or not, because they end up in that emergency room. Yeah. So
And does that exist in California?
I'm sorry,
Does that exist in California?
medical kidnap?
No, a doctor, supportive doctor.
I lived there for a whopping 2 years. And yes, I did find, but they're super few and far between. And will they stand up if under pressure?
Right.
That's the big, big, big question, especially now. So that's where you have to find somebody you can trust. And you even have to find that here, unfortunately, is what we found out with the baby Cyrus situation, is that a lot of people thought that they could trust their doctor, and they weren't in that particular situation. And so you had somebody who somehow got through the cracks, in my opinion, with that clinic. And so you've got to know who you're seeing no matter where you're at.
Yeah.
Okay, last question, Misty. What's an action item? What can we do now that we've heard this? We know this information. What can we do to help? What are some some basic things that we can do tomorrow that would help this situation?
You can right now, given the governor some incentive to sign the vaccine exemption form for 18 and up. So you can do that. And you can also reach out to your legislators and let them know that you want certain bills, no matter what state you're in. Reach out to your representatives and say, hey, what's going on with CPS in my state? Find out. And then advocate for laws that will help protect parents, like a simple notifications of rights bill. Those are action items you can take right away. If you know of families that are hurting in your community, take them under your wing and help them. Take them to church with you. Get them plugged in with your church or Safe Families for Kids. There was a lady here that has worked for Safe Families for Kids and was saying how wonderful they are, what a great organization it is. So you can definitely take action. If you're not already connected with your legislator, you should be, the people who are representing you at the Capitol, and make a connection so that when you call them, they know who you are, they know your face, they know your voice, and they know that you're a sound constituent. And when you advocate for a certain bill to be passed, they know you. That's really, really important, and it's something you can do right now.
Misty, thank you so much for being here tonight. This was awesome.
Absolutely. Happy to help.